Last week, we took a deep dive into the then forthcoming German elections and everything predicted by Peter Oliver, our Germany correspondent, has come to pass. Angela Merkel's farewell tour might be longer than Elton John's. She might still be there next year trying to negotiate her exit from power. This week, we're going to take a deep dive into the Russian elections that have been and gone. Why? Because nobody else has. And I'll give you a good reason for that. It seems, according to the electorate, that the great majority of the people of Russia prefer either President Vladimir Putin or his communist opposition. To make some sense of it, we go to the oracle of Russian political matters, RT's Brian MacDonald in Moscow. Brian, thank you for joining us. Just before we turn to Russia, I was caught by something you've written this morning, which with a map shows Germany is actually 3 different countries, having voted decisively differently. That may be pregnant with some problems for the future, don't you think?
Indeed, and as we're going to discuss maybe in a moment, Russia in some ways is a different country in 3 or 4 different places as well, electorally. I mean, the communists, for example, are stronger in the middle of the country. The nationalists are stronger in the east of the country. The pro-Putin party is stronger in the south. I mean, you know, it works in different ways too. But yeah, just looking at Germany today, and I mean, Germany is a country I know reasonably well. It's a very stark, there's obviously some nuance in big cities, but in general, you know, around the country, that the south is very conservative and Catholic, the north is liberal and left-leaning, and then the south of what used to be East Germany, the area around Dresden and stuff like that, Leipzig, that's voting very heavily for the AfD, which is the far-right party. And of course, there are nuances in the major cities. Obviously, as you know, cities are always more liberal than towns. I mean, just the way life is. And you will see, for example, that even in the conservative Catholic South, the Green Party have done well in Stuttgart and Munich, you know, and you will see, for example, that the Die Linke, the far left party, have done well, for example, in parts of Berlin and in, you know, in Dresden City, for example. But overwhelmingly, yeah, you're right. And it's very similar in Russia, George, and this is something that nobody in the UK would talk about, in England or Scotland, is that there's a kind of notion that Russia is, you know, uniformly sort of pro-Putin or uniformly, you know, a similar country, even though it's the biggest country in the world. That's not the case at all. For example, the Communist Party did very well in Moscow, the capital, whereas they didn't do so well in St. Petersburg to the same extent as they did in Moscow. The south of the country, particularly the Islamic regions, are very heavily pro-Putin's party, United Russia. That might surprise people, for example, that might have thought, you know, because of Chechnya, the war years ago, that maybe the Muslim regions would not be so supportive of Putin. And then, you know, there's the east of the country where the communists did very well this time, and historically the far-right LDPR has done very well over there. And then you'll also find pockets of communist support in the industrial regions near the Ural Mountains for obvious reasons, because, you know, the workers and the unions and whatever might, you know, lean towards the communists. But yeah, the fact the communists did so well in Moscow is interesting. And what's happened is that the Western media, the British media, particularly Financial Times and other outlets like that, have tried to, and the Independent most notably, actually, which ran a piece the other day that was just bizarre. They have basically tried to make it sound like the communists have won, well, not won, have made gains because they were supported by Alexei Navalny. Now, here's what happened, George. In the weeks building up to the election, the Communist Party were polling very, very strongly. And one poll actually showed them in the mid-20s in support, but generally, at the start of the campaign, they were on 12 or 13%, and they kind of got up to an average of around 20, which is where they got, which is obviously a considerable swing. I mean, to go from 12 or 13% to 20 in a couple of weeks is obviously a swing of 50%, basically, you know. And 2 days before the election, Alexei Navalny's people issued this list they call smart voting. And smart voting basically was, we want you to vote for these candidates because they got the best chance of defeating the United Russia candidate in their constituency or in their area. And like, obviously, because of the swing to the communist candidate was obviously the most likely to, win in or come second to Putin's party, the pro-Putin party, in most of the country. So what the Navalny team did was they released this list and they said, vote for the communists, basically. And now they're trying to take credit for the communist gains. And even though they did it 2 days before the election and the communists had been building in the polls for, 3 or 4 weeks or even longer. And what's happened is that some of the stenographers in the British media have basically tried to present it as victories for Navalny-backed candidates, as opposed to victories for the communists. I mean, this is the kind of narrative management you're dealing with, because they don't want to say the C word, because obviously if they run stories saying, wow, the communists have made big gains, a lot of the people in Britain, for example, or America, who don't like Vladimir Putin, well, they definitely don't like the communists either. So, I mean, for historical reasons, as you know.
Fascinating. Even I had no idea of some of that detail you've just given us. And we certainly won't find it in the Western media, and for the reasons that you have adumbrated. Now, the outcome is that President Putin, with a slight dip, his party is solidly in power, but the communists are in second place. For someone like me, for example, that would be supportive of Putin's foreign policy, but critical of the way the economy is run internally inside Russia, I regard that as quite a good outcome. Will it influence the course of Putin's presidency? Will they take account of the fact that a party to the left of them has done very well in these elections?
Yeah, just to add something there, George. I mean, the communists, by the way, dispute the results in certain districts. They allege that, it's very important to mention this, they allege that electronic voting, which was used for the first time in the parliamentary election in 9 different regions, including Moscow City, trump some unusual results. Now, let's just talk about the Moscow thing for a second. It's important to mention this. In Moscow, they actually held a protest about it on Saturday. About 1,000 people turned up in the center of the city at Pushkin Square. Basically, they alleged that a lot of their candidates were winning, some by quite handsome margins, until the electronic votes were added. We've seen this in America with the postal ballots, for example, where the election results changed dramatically. But they alleged that some fiddling went on with the e-voting, the online voting. Now, the reason that's important to mention is because it actually comes into your question, George, because any allegations that, the result wasn't honest would obviously have an effect on the legitimacy of the parliament and the legitimacy of the election itself. And this is where it's interesting, because the communists would argue that they actually should have gotten more seats than they did, especially in Moscow. And in the sense that, will this drag the Putin system to the left? Well, there have been signs in the last number of years, George, that the system is slightly moving leftwards, in the sense that, it's actually contradictory. In one sense, they've increased the pension age, which is a very neoliberal thing to do, obviously, but they have, for example, for the first time last year, I think it was, they've changed the tax system. Russia's been operating a 13% flat tax for 20 years. They increased it to 15% for higher earners. And you would imagine that's the first step, in separating the higher earners from the body of the public. They put that supposedly into a fund to support medical care for sick children. But you'd imagine that now that the kind of sacred 13% rate has been, at least modified in some respect, that should lead to higher increases. And a lot of higher earners here are fearful that they will end up paying 20 or 25%, which, I mean, sounds like very little compared to the UK, but it's obviously a big difference from 13, So will it bring the politics to the left, George? I would say that in Russia, like in most countries, the younger people definitely skew left. Russia doesn't have the same problems as some Western countries in terms of being unable to buy property. There is a growing shift, I think, George, here. When I came here first 10 or 11 years ago, you often found that even middle-class people sort of admired what would have been known as the oligarchs, the billionaires, that kind of admired these people, that they had such great wealth and kind of aspired to them. But I've noticed in the last few years that that kind of reverence is not held for those kind of people anymore. And there definitely is a shift to the left. And a lot of the communist vote would have been younger people, because one of the arguments, George, years ago in the Western media was that the communists are going to die because all their voters are literally dying. And because people were saying, the only people that vote for the communists are people that are nostalgic for the Soviet Union, pensioners, basically. Well, if the party has just increased its vote, now the party's vote had been declining for 30 years, basically. I mean, their high point in post-Soviet Russia was in 1996, when they did very, very well. And basically what's happened is that their vote declined for 2 decades, and the assumption was, it's because their voters are dying out, and they're not going to exist in 20 years. But the fact they've gotten such a great result this time obviously means that younger people are turning to them, not just weazened old pensioners who have a nostalgia for the days of Brezhnev. So yes, to answer your question, there's very clearly a shift leftwards, and this clearly puts pressure on Putin, George, because obviously one of the ways Putin legitimizes his rule or whatever is by keeping the elites under control and whatever have you. And he might have to turn around to the elites very shortly and say, look, if we're going to keep power in this country, we're going to have to bring in more socialist leaning policies, and they're not going to like that, obviously.
Brian McDonald, thank you for that wonderful tour of the Russian political horizon.
My pleasure, George. My pleasure. Thank you very much.